Hi, I'm Amanda McCollum. I am part of the leadership team here at Believing Church, and I am honored and excited to be bringing God's Word to you today. We have been on a journey in Hebrews chapter 11, going through what is called the Hall of Faith by many. I'm hearing week after week about different people who the writer of Hebrews have called men and women of great faith because of different things that they did in their life. But before we get started today, I wanted to ask you guys, has there ever been a time in your life, maybe a time recently, where you've gone in somewhere and you've just felt out of place? Like you thought, these are not my people. Maybe you've walked into a restaurant and the environment was not what you were expecting, or you took one look at the menu and thought, these are not my people, or I don't really feel comfortable here. Maybe it's even happened to you at a church. I know for me, it happened when I married my husband, Timothy. I am a Memphis girl. I've always lived in Memphis, except for a short period of time when I was in college. But I've never really thought of myself as a city girl until I married my husband, Timothy. See, Timothy would say he's a Memphis guy too, but he is originally from Tupelo, Mississippi. And the reality of that is he kind of lived on the outskirts of Tupelo, Mississippi. And to his family, I think especially at first, I was a city girl. And when I first met his family, they were so nice and so welcoming, but it was a very different environment. I mean, I remember one of the first times I went over there, it was a holiday, and I think they had gone hunting. There was a deer strung up in the yard. I had never seen that before. There's no hunters in my family. Another thing I quickly noticed was country dogs in Tupelo are different than the little city dogs that I have been used to in Memphis, Tennessee. I've always grown up with dogs in my house, and they've always been little inside dogs. I have a dog now. I'm a dog person. He's an inside dog. One of those gross people. He sleeps in the bed with us. We take him to Chick-fil-A. He's a city dog. Well, these country dogs are different. They are built different. Like, they could sense us coming. They chased our cars. They were biting our tires. They're in and out of the house all day. They're dirty. They are truly a different breed of dog. I was not used to it. And the very first night I ever spent with Timothy's family, I think we might have even still been dating, and they set up a little room off to the side for me. They were so kind and gracious. But I opened the door, and one of these Tupelo dogs was laying right on the pillow that I was about to go to sleep on. And I was like, oh. And then who would become my sister-in-law said, Peg, get up. And this dog stood up, and it only had 3 legs. And I was like, these are not my people. This is not my kind of dog. This is different for me. It was a different environment. And I'll poke fun of my own family too. Timothy had things to get used to when it came to my family. I think maybe the Memphis transition wasn't as unique for him, but I have a lot of family that live in New Orleans. I love New Orleans. It's cool like Memphis. Good music, good food, good culture. It's really hot. But there's a lot of French culture in New Orleans. Part of that French culture happens when you greet people. And I took Timothy there to meet my family, and we all said hi. And then Timothy came up to me with these wide eyes, and he looked really freaked out. And he said, your aunts and your cousins' wives all just kissed me on my face, which was not part of his culture. He's like, these people are not my people. And I think that's funny. It's kind of a good example because it was strange to us at first, but the more we got to know each other's families, the more we realized there are more commonalities here than differences. We are more alike than different. And I kind of feel that way about Hebrews chapter 11. Even being someone who's kind of grown up in the church and the faith, when I think about that Hall of Faith chapter of the Bible, I have those people up on a pretty high pedestal, and I think, those aren't my people. I wish they were. I would love to be a woman who was known as someone of great faith, but I kind of just qualify myself for being part of that list. And I hope that if you have been a part of this series like I have, and you've heard the stories of these different men and women and the unique challenges they faced, the unique circumstances they faced, and the unique ways that they expressed their faith in God, that it's helped you realize maybe there are some things about me that are more like these people than I realize. Maybe that same kind of faith can or does live in me. So when I'm at work during the week, I work in a corporate environment. So it's an office. I'm there 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And part of my job is helping new employees feel acclimated. So just like I talked about, wanting people to feel comfortable, not wanting to walk in and go, these are not my people. I feel very challenged to make my workplace one that's comfortable for people, where they feel welcomed there and, where they feel like part of the team. But I'm just one person, and I work in a really big office. And part of our orientation that I don't have a lot of control over is this big meeting that we have once a quarter just for new employees. And I want y'all to picture this with me. It's a lot of young people, maybe who have never worked in an office environment before. They're still trying to learn their job, and they get invited to this meeting with the chief revenue officer of our company. And it's in this really nice part of our office that people like me and them don't work in, and a really nice conference room table, and they don't really know what to expect. And I know the purpose of this meeting is for these new employees to get the big picture of our company and understand how they fit in. But I also know this is a really intimidating environment for them. So I want to try to make it comfortable. So I do what I do best. I provide snacks. I don't bake them. I purchase them. So I'm like eating. That always makes people feel better. And then I got the great idea at one point to try to do an icebreaker, because it's all these young people sitting around this big fancy conference room table and they do not want to say a word. So I'm like, well, maybe if we do an icebreaker, we ask them questions, they talk about something they feel comfortable with, then they'll feel comfortable talking throughout this presentation, or asking questions as things come up. So I pick easy questions, right? I'm trying to set these people up for success, and I'll put questions like, what's a favorite vacation spot, or where would you like to go on vacation? Tell me about your first job. And some of them, it's 2 years ago, they were bagging groceries at Kroger, or this is their first job. They're pretty easy questions. Well, one day, I don't know what was wrong. I was feeling feisty. I don't know if the snack gave me too much sugar. I was in a silly mood. And so I always pull a question as well and answer it for the table. And I pulled a question, and it said something like, what is your favorite karaoke song? But I said, what is it that you are most ashamed of? And then I looked up, and these poor people were like, because they thought the questions were going to be like that. And I was like, I'm kidding. That doesn't say that. We would never ask that. And that is a terrible thing to do to people. I don't recommend it, because the truth is we all have things about ourselves in our past and our present that we are ashamed of, that we hope no one knows, that are our deep, dark secret, or the part of our past that we want to keep buried. And that kind of brings us to our hero of the faith that we're going to talk about today. And I want to circle back to this question and ask you, if every single time you had to walk into a room, any place in your whole life, family, friends, school, church, job, grocery store, you had to put on a name tag that said, hello, my name is Amanda, and then it said that thing that you are most ashamed of. Every single place you went, how would that change where you went, what you do, or what you thought about yourself? And I want you to sit with that for just a second. Today we're going to be talking about Rahab. Rahab is mentioned throughout Scripture a few times as a woman of great faith and as a prostitute. As a matter of fact, when Michael asked if I would preach on this particular Sunday, he's been going through each person in order in the hall of faith in Hebrews 11, and we kind of did the math, and we were like, that's Rahab. And I think I made a joke, like, I got to speak about Rahab the prostitute. Why me? And that's where my mind went first with Rahab. It wasn't about Rahab, this woman of faith, Rahab, who was once a little girl that probably never intended to grow up and become a prostitute, didn't think that's where life would lead her. Rahab, who became woven into the very line and ancestry of Jesus. I didn't think about those things. I just thought about the fact that she was a prostitute. And our text out of Hebrews 11 is brief on Rahab, but what it does say is significant. Hebrews 31 says, by faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. So I want to take a few minutes telling you the story of Rahab. as it appears in Joshua chapter 2. Now, if you've been with us over the past few weeks, you've heard about Israel, and you've heard about some of the things that God has done through Israel and his people. But let me give you the quick backstory. The people, God's chosen people, had been in captivity in Egypt. And God said, I'm going to get you out. And God did. God got them out. And the people of Israel escaped. And the Egyptian army was following them and chasing them and pursuing them through the Red Sea. The people that were chosen by God made it to the other side, and the people that were chasing them got crushed by the waves and just totally conquered and defeated. And then they were like, woohoo, we're going to the promised land. We're going to where a better place that God has told us. And what happened was their journey ended up being a lot longer than they thought it would be. And ironically, to me, because it's kind of in contradiction to Rahab, part of that is because they didn't have a lot of faith in God. God told them to go send some spies, scope out this land. They sent 12, and 10 of the 12 spies were like, it's too scary, we shouldn't do it, it's too dangerous. After God had gotten them out of Egypt, after God had conquered those Egyptians, and they were disobedient to God, they did not have faith, and it ended up creating a lot of havoc for these Israelite people. And I hear a lot about those people. I think a lot about them during that time, and I've heard sermons during that time. But one thing I don't think a lot about is the word of mouth that was happening about these people of God during this time frame. So, there was no Twitter, right? There was no newspaper. I don't know if they had like messenger pigeons or something, but word was getting around that these Israelite people had escaped captivity, that the whole Egyptian army got wiped out by the sea, that the Israelites were coming to take some land, that God was going to give it to them. And I mean, there was a lot of commotion going around. People had heard of this, and that's where we're going to pick up in Joshua chapter 2. So I'm going to read this from God's word, but I'm also going to kind of give it a little bit of a Amanda buffer to make it easier to understand. So Joshua secretly sent in 2 spies. He said, go and look over the land, especially Jericho. So these 2 spies went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there at her house. So the king of Jericho, the king of the land where Rahab lived and where these spies came in, said, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. And so the king went and sent a message to Rahab and said, bring out the spies, bring out these men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out our whole land. But Rahab took these 2 men and hid them. She said, well, yeah, the men came here, but I didn't even know where they came from. I wasn't sure who they were. And it was getting to be dusk. It was late, and they left. As a matter of fact, they went that way. And I think if you go that way really fast, I bet you'll catch them. So make sure you go that way. And actually what had happened was she took the 2 spies up to the roof and hid them under some things that she had on the roof. So the king's men were like, okay, we're going to go get them. Old Rahab said they went that way. We're going that way. And so the king's men went out in pursuit of them. And then Rahab went up and found the spies. And she said, look, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. So that's what I'm talking about. These people had heard about these people that are conquering other kings, other armies, and they were afraid. She said, we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to these 2 other kings whom you completely destroyed. And when we heard of it, me and all my people, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. So she's like, I've heard this. I've heard what God did. And now I'm about to work out a deal with you guys. So she said, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. And then the spies said, our lives for your lives, they assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we'll treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land. So she let the spies down by a rope in her house, because her house was built into the city wall. And she said, now, I sent the king's men to pursue you this way. So I need you to go this way. And I want you to wait 3 days, because they're mad and they're looking for you. And they're going to look about 3 days before they give up. So you go and hide there for 3 days until they return, then go your way. And so the men said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you've tied the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you've brought your father, your mother, your brothers, your sisters, all your family in the house. If any of them go outside, their blood will be on their own heads. They're going to be gone for. We will not be responsible. But for all those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell them what we're doing, we'll be released from this oath you made us swear. And she said, agreed, let it be as you say. And so she sent them on their way, and they left, and she tied the scarlet cord on the window. Now, when the spies left, they returned back. They did exactly what Rahab said, first of all. They spent 3 days hiding, then they went back and told Joshua, guess what? Good news. The Lord has surely given this whole land into our hands. All these people are scared to death of us. We can go take it. So, as a result of Rahab's actions, the Israelite spies made it safely back to report what they had seen, which was that land is ready to be taken. Those people are scared to death, and Rahab and her family ended up being saved. So, the story of Rahab is really amazing to me. She was very, very brave, there's no doubt, and her faith was definitely displayed by action, just like the other people that we've seen in Hebrews chapter 11. But her story is also really convicting to me. How often do I want to give myself some kind of gold sticker of faith for doing something really easy that fits within my lifestyle, that's low risk, that fits within my schedule and my comfort zone, and then I call it an act of faith? So today I want to impart some things that I have learned over the past couple of weeks as I've really been digging into the story of Rahab. And first, it is that Rahab had a faith that was responsive and resourceful. Rahab had heard the stories of God's people. So these messenger pigeons that had come telling the word about, the Egyptians being destroyed in the Red Sea and these other kings being defeated. Rahab had heard those, and when she had the opportunity to interact with God's people, she took that opportunity. She helped them right away. She used the very home in which she lived as a prostitute to open her doors and hide these spies and to let them down through the window to safety. And it caused me to ask myself some questions that I want to ask you as well. How many times do I think God will have to bless me with a certain provision or resource before I will be able to put my faith into action? So do I tell God, well, I'll start giving to the church or helping people in need one day when I make more money? Or do I obey him with what he has already given me in my hand today? Do I tell God that I'll open my home to show hospitality to others or provide a place for others to receive care or comfort when I have a bigger, nicer house with an extra room? Or do I do it now with what I already have? Do I tell God that I'm going to serve him when my life circumstances change, when things get easier or less busy, when my kids are older or I'm retired from my full-time job? Do I tell God that I would volunteer in church if he gifted me with the ability to sing or speak very eloquently or play an instrument, but I'm not allowing him to use the gifts that he may have already put in me from the day I was born? What excuses am I making in my life today that are keeping me from being responsive to God and utilizing the resources that he's already given me today for him and for his kingdom? Another thing that was really evident in the story to me about Rahab's faith was that her faith was risky. So Rahab and her people knew all about the Israelites, and they were scared to death of them. She had the opportunity to take down some of their spies. These are the enemy, guys. She had the opportunity to help her people in her town, the people that she's grown up with, the people that she knew, that she shopped with, that her family interacted with. She had the opportunity to help them by turning over these spies. Rahab was also asked to help by the king. I can't help but wonder if part of Rahab didn't consider what that might have meant for her. Would she have been celebrated by the people in her town for turning over these spies? Could she have been seen as a valuable informant for the king, maybe redefining herself in the community? Like Rahab used to do this, but now she works for the king because she helped keep those spies out. Would her family maybe have been proud of her for turning over the spies? But instead, Rahab lied to the king's men. What would have happened to Rahab if the king's men or the king found out that she lied to them? Obviously, she risked her very life, and probably the life of everyone in her family too, by that decision that she made. And so that brought up more questions. How many times do I only offer to display faith when it feels comfortable or safe to me? How many times have I dismissed the call of God to help or serve others because it creates some level of risk or even minimal discomfort for me? And as I was reflecting on my own life, like I said, I don't see myself as someone who is a great person of faith, but I can certainly think of seasons in my life where I've had to operate in some risk where it comes to my faith in God. And one of those big areas is with my kids. And if you've heard me speak before, you may have heard parts of the story before, but I share it because it's part of what God has done in my life. And the truth is, part of this is a story of faith, and part of this is a story of shame for me. Like Rahab's story kind of involves some shame. But when Timothy and I got married, we had our first child, our daughter Charlotte, and we knew before she was born that she had a severe heart defect, and Charlotte was going to need heart surgery after she was born. And we had great faith that God was going to heal her and that she would come home and live with us and be part of our family. And that was not what happened. Charlotte was born, she had heart surgery as planned, and then she struggled. And when she was 16 days old, she passed away unexpectedly. She never got to come home. She lived in the hospital, and it was definitely the most painful thing that we've ever experienced. And it still hurts. It'll be 15 years. And I wish I could say, like, that was my testimony, and this is what God's done since then, and that is a testimony, and God has done things since then. But this story is different, because after I had Charlotte, my dream of having children had not gone away. And Timothy and I kind of wanted to make sure everything was going to be okay. We're like, we are not going to go through that again. So we went and we saw a geneticist. Why did this happen? Help us, are we at high risk for something? And no, everything was fine. They told us it was like you had been struck by lightning. It's not going to happen again. Have more children, go with God. So we're like, okay. So 2 years later, we had our son Dax, who was such an answer to prayer. He was a healthy child. We got to bring him home and just operate in all the faith that it takes to bring home any child, because it's a lot and it's scary. But it was truly a blessing, and Dax is a blessing. If you don't know Dax, you got to get to know Dax. But 2 years later, we were blessed with another pregnancy. And same thing, praying for a healthy child, kind of hoping that I'd get to use all this girl stuff that I had boxed up in the attic and just kind of redeem part of that story. And because of the complications I had with my first pregnancy, part of all of my pregnancy journeys were a lot of doctor's visits, a lot of scans with high-risk specialists, a lot of testing that people don't normally have, just to make sure things were okay. And I went through that with Dax, and everything was great. And I went through that with this third pregnancy, and everything was not okay. They quickly said, okay, this is another little boy. There's something wrong with his heart. His kidney doesn't look right. His measurements aren't right. There's something chromosomal going on with this child. And this is the part that really brings me a lot of shame, or can, because I was not okay with that news. I remember I was sitting in the doctor's office, and the doctor came in and said, well, I know that abortion's not on the table for you. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's right, because I had written that on my notes to him before I knew anything was happening. But I thought, I don't want to do this again, though. I don't want to have another child that has problems and watch them suffer and die. It's terrible. I'm not interested in this. And I really had kind of a crisis of faith, like, God, are you good? God, do you hear me? God, this is not what I asked for. Like, this, why are you doing this to me? Woe is me, God, kind of thing. And, I had voices in my head telling me things like, it's not fair to have a child who suffers. It's a burden on society. What about Dax? Is Dax going to have to care for this child one day? Like, what kind of situation? Like, there were all these excuses that I was giving myself of why it would be easier not to have this third child in my life. And I'm glad to say that me and Timothy made it through that season, but I was thinking about that season and feeling like it was a risky decision to carry this baby to term, knowing that he was going to have problems and not knowing how extensive they were going to be. And I was thinking about it and thinking how that might be represented in Hebrews. And I thought of the phrase, by faith, Amanda and Timothy had a son named Miles and waited to see what God would do. And it made me think about Rahab, because when Rahab took this great risk for her whole family, she didn't know how it was going to turn out. She didn't know if when she told the spies to go this way, if they might accidentally go this way. She didn't know they were the enemy, if they would turn on her like that, if she would be the first to go. She risked everything and waited to see what God could do. And a lot of times, these great acts of faith, these risky situations, we don't know how it's going to work out. All we have to do is take the initial step that we feel like God is telling us to do, and then wait and see what he is going to do. And that looks different. And I will say, to circle back just with my part of the story, God has been so good. Miles's life has been harder than I ever could have imagined, especially at the beginning. And it has been better than I ever could have imagined. And every single day, I am so thankful for the privilege of being his and Dax's mom. And God was so good and gracious to bless us with both of those children. So, as I read through Rahab's story, though, perhaps the most amazing thing to me about her is not her readiness, her resourcefulness, or even the risk that she took, even though she risked her very life. Probably the most amazing thing to me is that something about Rahab believed that this God that she heard about, the God that destroyed armies, the God that destroyed other kings and communities, the God that had promised the very land that she already called home, might be for her. And Rahab's faith was redefining, not by man, but by God. I said at the beginning that Rahab is mentioned a few times throughout Scripture, and in every reference, she's referred to as Rahab the prostitute. I'm not a theologian, but I don't think there are a bunch of other Rahabs in the Bible. And part of me wishes that she would have been referred to as something else. You know, Rahab, the redeemed, Rahab, who was formerly a prostitute, then the great woman of faith. But in every reference, she's continued to be called Rahab the prostitute. Remember that question that I asked you at the beginning of this message? What if every time you walked into a room, you had that name tag and you were referred to as your name and that sin, that choice, that decision that brings you shame? Well, Rahab kind of was, at least when it comes to being recorded in the Scripture. I already read the verse about her in Hebrews 11. James chapter 2 also references Rahab, and James is talking about faith and how important it is to have faith with action. James actually says, in the same way, was not even Rahab, the prostitute, considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. So Rahab wasn't redefined by people here on earth, but Rahab was redeemed by God in heaven. And her faith believed that was possible even while she was living as a prostitute in Jericho. And I just think about how many of us walk into rooms feeling like we have that label on us of sin, shame, and guilt that we cannot escape from, whether we put those labels on ourselves or whether someone has called us that, and that's been placed upon us. I think about labels like addict, adulterer, broken, unlovable, unworthy, failure, abandoned, dropout, sick, deficient, phony, imposter, stupid. Maybe the most amazing thing about Rahab's faith is that she believed God was for her enough to be ready, use her resources, and take great risks while being labeled Rahab the prostitute. I came to tell you today that the same God that redeemed Rahab can redeem you. Although you cannot control the labels that others place on you, even if they place that label on you every time you go back to your home or your school or your work or that friend group, you can have the faith to believe that what God says about you is true and that He is for you today, wherever you are, whatever circumstances you're in. And I want to tell you some labels that you can give yourself and hold as true today, some things that God has said about you. Genesis 1:27 says, we are made and created in the image of God. Put that on. Psalm 139 says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Ephesians 1:7 says we are redeemed and forgiven. Philippians 4:13 says He gives us strength. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says I am a new creation. Romans 8:38 tells us that nothing can separate us from God's love. Psalms 18:32 says, God arms me with strength and He makes my way perfect. Isaiah 43:1 says, do not fear, I've redeemed you, I've summoned you, you are mine. Joshua 1:9 says He's with me wherever I go. Jeremiah 29:11 says, He has plans to give me a future and a hope. 2 Timothy 1:7 says He's given me a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. So, what happened to Rahab? We know Rahab was saved. We know her whole family was saved. Rahab ended up marrying an Israelite man, and she became the great-great-grandmother of King David, which is really cool if you know who King David is. But what's even cooler is that Rahab was woven into the very lineage of Jesus Christ. She's one of the few people that was named in His line here on earth. But I want to ask you again, how would Rahab's life have been different if she only saw herself as Rahab the prostitute? And then I want to leave you with a question. How would your life be different if you had the faith to believe that God is for you today? Because only a faith that God is for us will lead us to a faith that takes risk.